Normally, we interview our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari on Mondays, but Lisa was unavailable earlier this week because she was flown out to Washington, D.C. to address Congress on the Iran revolution taking place there. Lisa's back in Los Angeles and has details of her trip. So, Lisa, what specific information was Congress seeking from you?
I think, Congress is well aware of what's going on, the people's movement inside Iran. It's just that they're battling a Biden administration that has not wanted to get involved more directly with supporting regime change or supporting any further the movements inside Iran. So what we have gotten from the Biden administration up till now is a little bit of distancing themselves from the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal. If you remember, that was the deal that was signed between President Obama and the five world powers and the Iran regime back in 2015. President Trump came in May of 2018, and just as he said he would, he ripped up the deal and said the United States is pulling out. So Biden campaigned on getting right back into the deal. And again, we're not even talking about Iran's, the regime's behavior. We're not talking about the billions of dollars that they pour into terrorism. We're not talking about how they have, awful, brutal human rights violations. We're not talking about how they have American, Canadian, European blood on their hands, but we just talk about getting into the deal and getting out of the deal like a ping pong match between different partisan administrations. So now you have the Biden administration who has been trying so very hard to get back into the Iran nuclear deal, and it just hasn't worked. And that is mainly because the Iran regime has asked for too much. So now, just to catch everyone up, over the last 5 months, we've had Iranians on the streets in Iran getting their eyes poked out, getting killed, getting shot at point blank just for supporting these peaceful protests. 18,000 young people are currently in prison because of their protesting, and many have been executed. Many celebrities, influencers, rappers, musicians, dancers have been rounded up as a symbolic measure to say you shouldn't support the people's movement. So I was there in Washington doing a briefing on really the inside. What are the people of Iran saying? How is this movement different than other movements? Why is this the Iranian people's best chance in 44 years? This government came into power 44 years ago when the Shah of Iran, the king, was toppled and this Islamic regime came in. I talked about why this is the best chance they've ever had, why the people of Iran are braver than ever, and they want the Western world's help in getting this done. And the people of Iran, they have one clear message for Washington and anyone else who's willing to help them. It's, please, we want your help, but if you're not going to help us, at least don't stand in the way. Don't take the sanctions off the Iran regime. Don't let them off the hook. And please help us to get to our goal, which is ultimately regime change and to establish a democratic, free society.
Lisa, the death toll in Turkey and Syria has now reached over 11,000, well over 11,000 following Monday's devastating earthquake in the region. Israeli Defense Forces have sent, 15 cargo planes and set up a field hospital in Turkey as rescue efforts continue.
Yeah, there are it's horrific, right? And I think the death toll, since I checked, was a little higher than that even. So it's steadily climbing. It's hard to even get a grasp for what the death toll is, but it's obviously it's going to be in the tens of thousands. And that's just, it's horrific to think that all those people could not get out. The stories of babies, or the one baby, I don't know if you got a chance to see, the umbilical cord was still attached to the mother who died, and the baby was able to be saved. I mean, you think about this child's future and the first moments of life for this child, and it's just horrific. But then you also have these feel good stories that come out of there, the way that people are helping, and all the outpour of love and support from around the world, but especially from Israel, who's a neighbor and not an ally, right? So politics are being put aside, and perhaps this can put them into a new chapter politically in the way that Israel is helping. And I thank you, Hal, for bringing attention to this story, because often Israel, a small country the size of the state of New Jersey, is often putting its hat in the ring and sending humanitarian aid whenever there is some sort of natural disaster all throughout the world. And this being obviously no exception to that, especially since it is in their neighborhood and they're able to send help their way.
Lisa, let's circle back to Iran for just a moment here. It appears as though the Iranian military is trying to flex its muscles just a little bit as 2 Iranian naval ships are reportedly sailing toward the Panama Canal. Is the Islamic Republic trying to project its power into the Americas?
Yes, and they have been doing for a long time. I was able to catch up with a friend of mine who's an expert in Latin American affairs and national security, and he's been following this. And I actually have interviewed him several times, so we've had our finger on this issue for a while now, and that is the growth of the presence of Iran's proxies in Latin America for over a decade right now, and we're looking at places mostly Venezuela, Brazil, Bolivia. We're looking at Nicaragua. We're looking at places where they have either been able to infiltrate or that the government lends itself to infiltration. So in the case of Venezuela, it's a no-brainer, right? There are direct flights between Caracas and Tehran already. There are relationships there. You see so many Hezbollah operatives on the ground there. You see them opening up cultural centers. You see them having an influence on the ground. You also see Syrian operatives there, both in Syria and in Venezuela. You see flip-flopping of nationals living in both places. So there is a reciprocity already. And look, the continent is really up for grabs, Hal. So they're thinking to themselves, why not be at the footstep of the Americas? Why not have, be closer to our sworn enemy and have access there? So, think about the endless scenarios where they can get in from our southern border, which is extremely vulnerable and porous. They can easily launch a bomb from Latin America into the United States. It's something that the Biden administration and many administrations before him have been sleeping on, not paying too much attention to it. There were a few of these investigations that were actually canceled by the Obama administration looking into Hezbollah in Latin America. And again, it points to the fact that the Obama administration and now it's 2.0, the Biden administration have such an affinity for Iran's regime that they kind of wanted to look the other way when it comes to its dirty work, whether it's in Iran, in the Middle East, or in Latin America. So yes, Iran has been taking advantage of its partners in Latin America. It's moving its ships towards the Panama Canal like it promised it would. And of course, Brazil, that recently had an election, a very liberal candidate there, an old friend of the Iran regime. And they have obviously rekindled that relationship, and they will get a lot of help from Brazil as well because of that.
Let's talk about that recent image that was seen on Twitter here of an apparent Iranian missile with the words "Death to Israel" written in Hebrew, seen at an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps display in Iran. It's gone viral.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at this. What an image, right? So you don't need any words there. Look, they're trying to flex their muscles and send a message to the United States and to Israel and really to the free world to say, we don't care how many sanctions you put on us. We don't care if there's no JCPOA, no nuclear deal. We don't care about the people that are marching out onto the streets, but we still are continuing forward with our programming. And that's exactly it. They will continue on with enrichment of uranium. They will continue funding terror where they have the funds. I mean, we hope that the sanctions have been doing their share of putting a dent in their economy so that they are not able to have that kind of liquid assets. But this is them putting on a show. This is exactly what this regime has always done. For 44 years, they have flexed their muscles. They have tried to isolate themselves from the Western world by creating these enemies. And at home, even though there are 80 million people out onto the streets, a certain small segment of the population does rally around the flag when they do see things like this, sworn enemies of the United States and Israel. But I will tell you how many of my interviews on the ground, they have repeated several times that the last 5 months, the protests, the people of Iran have really had an awakening, and they understand that this is propaganda talk. And there's so many chants that say America is not the enemy is right here. It's our government. And they understand that this is all propaganda talk, whether it's about Israel being the enemy or the United States being the enemy.
Yeah, many believe the changes need to be made right now, or even yesterday already. Lisa, it appears as though China wants the United States to return debris from the alleged spy balloon that was shot down. That's according to China's ambassador to France. He says, listen, this is Chinese property. We want it back. And if the Americans don't want to return it, it really demonstrates their dishonesty.
How do you say chutzpah in Chinese, Tal? There are no words. I mean, think about this scenario. I mean, it doesn't really even need to be painted out, but I will go ahead and unpack this a bit. Think about them putting these surveillance balloons. I mean, at the Foreign Desk, we're working on a story today that actually we have now experts that are telling us these balloons were able to gather intelligence, even though I know a lot of people are dismissing this and saying, they want to, in the words of Daryl Issa that I was able to interview over while I was in DC, he says they wanted to measure before they cut, which is a good way of putting this. They were kind of testing the United States to see what their resolve would be, how quickly they would act. They did not act too quickly, right? So instead of shooting it down over the Pacific, we got it over the Atlantic. And why wait all this time? Why all the deliberation? So in that case, the United States failed that. But imagine on the part of the Chinese to say, we're testing you at best case scenario, we're testing you. What worst case scenario, this was espionage, right? And we were spying on you. And now you got to give it back because you're the one who's being dishonest. And guess what? With the Biden administration, they can say whatever they want and get away with it. So, Xi Jinping and Biden had a meeting just a couple of months ago. For 3 hours, they talked, and none of this was brought up. None of the provocations, none of the surveillance, none of the copycat technology, none of their spies being in our labs, in our schools, in our universities, in our places of governing, from local all the way up to federal. We know that they are there. None of this was brought up. So they will continue pushing and pushing because they can.
Lisa, American forces are returning to the Philippines to counter alleged Chinese threats. The longtime allies announced that American forces would be granted access to 4 more Philippine military camps, aside from the 5 other local bases?
Yeah, so they're trying to beef up their presence in the region, and of course, as a result of China moving forward, and it looks like China will invade Taiwan. So we're trying to prepare for that day. Again, referring back to the meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden, the only takeaway from the White House notes was that Biden is confident that China will not invade Taiwan. Well, guess what? It looks like the actions that the military is taking speak a very different message. And that message is that we know they're going to do it. We're just wondering when it will happen. So obviously, we're seeing a lot of this. We're trying to be in the region, trying to have a presence there and to counter whatever Chinese threat there is over there before it gets too late.
Now, still with China, a new survey says TikTok is the most popular app for young North Americans right now, ahead of YouTube. How concerned should we be about this?
It's very concerning because there is kind of like this reverse graph here with the popularity of TikTok skyrocketing here in the United States, and obviously a lot of lawmakers trying to ban TikTok in the same breath. So they understand the threat that TikTok is presenting, obviously owned by Chinese, and able to gather a lot of information. Now in Washington, they are going to be questioning a lot of experts on this to see to what extent China can gather information from this app in order to see if this ban will be only based on certain states, because now Texas is going forward. I know New Jersey actually applied this ban to its government workers. They're not able to access it on their phones. It's crazy to think that it's become so popular among the youth, but then they're using this obviously to spy on us as well. So I don't know if the young people are going to be out on the streets protesting if this app is in fact banned because they rely on it so much. But these are the facts. And then I think the government should be much more transparent about what the threat really is.
Now, we have some good news for conservatives. Republican GOP leaders and committee members on armed services vowed that they are looking at ways to slash woke spending from the defense budget and strengthen the military. Lisa, what exactly does woke spending look like?
If you've been following some of these stories that are coming out of the military, where people are getting suspended or punished in some capacity if they don't use the right pronouns, if they don't ask people's pronouns, a certain level of education for woke culture and pronouns and such. This is the military. I mean, and if you look at just everything across the board, you look at what, fifth graders in China are learning calculus, and our fifth graders here are learning about exactly this, pronouns, and you can be a girl and be a boy, you could be a boy and be a girl, et cetera, et cetera. This kind of, this ridiculousness has been following us into very serious sectors. And that is obviously with the military. We have government workers that are very concerned about this. but the military should be concerned with one thing, and that's defense, and that's keeping our borders, our nation, our assets safe, and that's been lost. So this is an attempt to publicly say we're cutting that funding, meaning we're not going to put any sort of curriculum or education or focus on those types of concerns, and to move forward with what is important.
Political reporter and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us again from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.